Let me start by thanking Creative Mornings. It is morning. I haven't had my coffee yet. Creative Mornings. And thank you, Kaneko, for this absolutely fabulous, beautiful space. For all of those who may be listening in on this from those 220 cities worldwide, come see this space, come see Omaha. It's an amazing city. I'm glad to call it home now as a former New Yorker. Now, it's a natural connection to ask a scientist to talk at a session that's mainly for artists, because I think science and art really do come together so nicely. Always tinkering, always playing, no fixed direction. And sometimes when things don't work, you start with a blank canvas and you start again, right? It's kind of like science. And when you're done, you get these wonderful magical productions, which often can seem daunting or maybe a little frightening for those with primitive minds, right? So right now, believe it or not, thanks to something called science, people in countries all over the world can see and hear me right now, right? If you don't understand how that works, that could be a little scary. So I'm going to talk today, when I was asked, given this theme of a monumental task, I thought I would talk about how do we reclaim science in a nation that's banning books and denying a global pandemic currently. And this sort of monumental task has been long in the making. So let me take you back to beginning of the 17th century when this guy called Galileo looked out in a telescope and decided, wait, the universe doesn't revolve around the earth. Actually, we revolve around the sun, right? He actually was put in house arrest for that thinking. So there's been this long issue around distrust in science. Now, I'm going to try to focus my discussion on more health-related issues and weave in some of these other concepts about this relationships between science, art, religion over the years. Let's see if this... So, I want to introduce you to my...
Yes, vaccines do harm people. By the way, so I just found out something when I was on lunch, and I wanted to show it to you. We were talking about Dr. Tenpenny's testimony about magnetic vaccine crystals. So this is what I found out. So I have a key and a bobby pin here. Explain to me why the key sticks to me. It sticks to my neck, too. I got those. Yeah, so if somebody can explain this, that would be great. Any questions?
Okay. In every Denny's in America today, every 5-year-old, I'm magnetic, Mom. Okay? That's my day.
Yes,
I live in a world where 40% of American, U.S. adults think that the coronavirus is exaggerated, and 20% of people think vaccines cause autism. You know, smallpox, measles, polio, those things. You know, the vaccines that made all those things go away cause autism. And another 20% literally believe that there's a microchip inside of the vaccine, right? So this is the world that we currently exist in, and this is the mistrust that we need to bridge for a better society for all of us. Now, I want to be very honest with you. I gave the example of Galileo, careful with the mic, gave the example of Galileo previously. But the anti-vaccine movement actually started with the first vaccine, right? Not surprising. I teach this to my students when we talk about things like antimicrobial resistance. And I go, yeah, you know, back when we had penicillin originally in World War II, yep, antibiotic resistance started immediately with the first doses of antibiotics. It's actually the same thing happened with vaccines. The first vaccine, which fortunately, because of this vaccine, none of you in this audience have experienced that, right? We've eradicated, not just eliminated, eradicated smallpox because of a vaccine, but it was viewed as against God's will to have a vaccine, right? And I pulled this out from a cartoon from 1802 about the cowpox, or the wonderful effects of the new inoculation. And for those, hopefully everybody can see this, the thought was that these people with this awful vaccine will have cows coming out of all sorts of orifices because they'll be transmorphing into cows Does that sound familiar to people in this audience when we think about mRNA vaccines, that somehow they're going to replace our genetic structure and make us something else, right? So this theme is a theme that's over 300 years old. But the polarization and distrust extends way beyond vaccines when I talk about mistrust of science within our communities. So here's climate change.
You imagine that we live in an age of reason, and the global warming alarm is dressed up as science, but it's not science, it's propaganda.
There's no direct evidence which links 20th century global warming to anthropogenic greenhouse gases.
We're just being told lies. That's what it comes down to.
You can't say that CO2 will drive climate. It certainly never did in the past.
Okay, so rhetoric, and let's look at what's actually happened to climate in the United States worldwide since we had excellent records at the end of the 1800s. So this is my best way to show how every year we have gotten warmer and warmer and warmer and keep going, warmer and warmer, right? So that's the reality. But despite the reality, you notice what some of the rhetoric you hear across our communities about climate change is not real. There's lots of ways to make this work for adults. You know, false experts, I call them merchants of deaths out there that tell you, oh, don't worry about the pandemic, just let everybody get infected, herd immunity, it'll save us all, right? So we have these false experts, a lot of different ways, conspiracy theories, etc. But you wonder, well, how does this work for kids, right? They have, where's one of these things? Everybody have a cell phone in their pocket? They have the world's knowledge sitting in their pocket. How do you get some of these conspiracy theories going? How do people believe fake experts? How do they have this anti-science mentality? And it starts early, right? You have to have kids, and you have to indoctrinate kids to think differently from what they're naturally inclined
10 years
to
ago,
do.
a school district in rural York County was thrust into the national spotlight as it grappled with issues of science, religion, and education in a U.S. federal court case. The trial involving Dover Area School District is a significant part of a long series of legal challenges regarding what is fit to teach in America's public school science classrooms. Typically, these cases were framed as religion versus science. There was little doubt that religious views drove the opposition to evolution's place in the classroom. Dover's case was different. Instead of suggesting a religious theory or questioning evolution without providing an alternative, Dover wanted teachers to read a statement in 9th grade biology class that said evolution was not a fact. The statement would introduce an alternative to evolution called intelligent design. Intelligent design is the idea that life is too complex to have evolved without a guiding hand. Proponents don't say who or what the designer might be. It was, one Dover board member said, simply a matter of academic freedom.
Now, I showed this example for a specific reason. And when I'm asked, how do you talk to people who deny science? So you'll notice here that it wasn't just saying get rid of evolution from the curriculum, right? Or the nonsense of it's a theory, right? I'm a big fan of gravitational theory, even though it's a theory. I do not jump off of tall buildings expecting to fly. But it's because there was an alternative given to evolution, intelligent design. Now, the key aspect, if you take all science and you boil it down, it's down to a testable hypothesis. And what you're teaching students now is a testable hypothesis, which is science, is absolutely equivalent to your opinion, right? That is not a good thing to teach kids as you're thinking about making them science literate and literate about all sorts of things moving forward. But it's not just evolution that we're that's being assaulted in schools. It's sex education, which from what I remember, we used to call it human biology, right? Nope, can't teach that in schools anymore. And it's broader, and I love the fact that you got a card today. here on Book Bingo, right? It's books, books, that's where the creativity comes. When kids read, for them it's about opening their world up to a universe of wonder. And so what happens when you start telling kids, sorry, we're going to ban these books or remove them from the curriculum or not have you teach them? What you're doing is you're slowly narrowing their mind and mindset of what's possible and probable and potential out there. This talks about a Texas lawmaker. So I could actually have left that blank because you either put in Texas or Florida, from what I can tell, into one of these headlines. But the interesting thing about the books that this lawmaker was trying to ban in Texas was that of the first 197 of them, which is pretty amazing, are written by ethnic minorities, women, or LGBTQ authors. That is not, I repeat, that is not a coincidence. And I would say that the long shadow of Pope Urban VIII from back in Galileo's day has pretty much cast that shadow over the last 600 years and continues to cast that shadow into our communities. And I think Oscar Wilde was specifically talking to this lawmaker in Florida and others who think about banning books. You can read it faster than I can say it, but I think it's just a great quote about people who want to ban books. So why the increase? So as I said, it's not like anti-science is new, right? It's not a new phenomenon. But why the increase? And there's no doubt why we're seeing an increase. The main reason we're seeing an increase, well, two reasons. The first main reason is the explosion of social media, right? So if you have a niche idea, trust me, somewhere on the internet, you will find somebody who agrees with you. So the internet has made that so much easier to do. And by doing that, what it's done is it's made it easier to spread misinformation because it's easier to find, it's out there, it's persuasive, and there's lots of techniques to spread misinformation. So now I have 5 horsemen of the apocalypse, no more 4. I've decided to add the 5th, called misinformation, and probably more deadly, as we saw during this pandemic, than the other 4. Now, misinformation also, this internet and the politicization of our responses also has essentially forced people into tribes, all sorts of tribes. But unfortunately, one of the big tribes, it's interesting, if you think about the civilization and unfolding of civilization, one of the key elements was getting rid of feudalism and tribalism, right? And we've now sort of gone back to a system that we know didn't work in the past, which is a tribal system. So essentially we have us versus them, and you pick whatever side you are, us, am I, them, but at the end of the day, you're both causing the same harm within our society. And the biggest us versus them, unfortunately, in the United States is political affiliation at this point. So now, if I wanted to know whether you're vaccinated or not, I only need to ask one question. I don't need to know your age, I don't need to know your sex, I don't need to know your race, I don't need to know your education, I don't need to know where you live in the country. I just need to ask you, are you affiliated as a Democrat or a Republican? It's the only thing I need to know about you. And I can guess whether or not you're vaccinated. That should never, ever, 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 ever be true. Ever be true, right? Given the fact that we know vaccines work, right? So currently, I guess this was January 22nd poll, there were more Republicans unvaccinated than there were Republicans with boosters, right? More unvaccinated than they were with boosters. And this same political divide, unfortunately, goes to a number of scientific issues. This here talks about climate change, whether or not you think global warming is something to be concerned about. You just have to ask one question. Are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? And there are very strong business interests that align behind making sure you don't believe in climate change, and that extends to all sorts of other things, but that's a different talk for a different time about Citizens United. But the Brookings Institute was spot on. It's to make a lot of this work, you need to make sure people have distrust in government. And as you sort of foster that distrust in government, you align that with your distrust in science, because all you want to do is be part of your tribe. And here's another great example of whether or not you trust medical scientists or scientists also completely aligns along a political spectrum. Bad news, very bad. And so you get things like this here for here in Omaha, somebody may have seen this. It's not about the virus, it's about control of the pandemic. So how did we do with the pandemic? Well, unfortunately, not very well, given this anti-science approach that we've seen in the United States. And all this, too busy to read, but all you have to see is more deaths in the United States than any other country during the Omicron variant. Actually, it's true always, but I show the Omicron variant because you get rid of all the early people who didn't know it was coming, they didn't have the tools, et cetera, et cetera. At this point, we have all the tools necessary to get this outbreak under check. So it's a good time to say, okay, who's doing well and not doing well? Unfortunately, the US, from a death standpoint, is doing the worst of any other country. Now, there's lots of reasons why the US did not do well during this pandemic. There's scientific reasons, to be very honest with you. There's how we decided to approach the pandemic, some of our measures that we took. But when you put it all together, what's really clear is that the main reason that we had difficulty during this pandemic and will trouble us into the next pandemic was the politicization of the response, distrust in science, and the distrust we have in government, and as importantly, if not more so, the distrust we have in each other, right? And so that was actually, the distrust in each other is what got me to say I would do this talk, because that's something we can control very much, right? Is our trust in our neighbors and building that trust with our neighbors, regardless of political affiliation or any other affiliation for that matter. Oh, that's too small, forget that. Global study just published last couple of weeks ago, 180 countries, and they looked at why you were more likely to have a poor response measured by deaths, right? So some of it is straightforward, depends on how elderly your population was, hello, yes, how many chronic conditions they had. That makes complete sense, we know that, right? 75% of all deaths, I believe, are those 60 and older or something like that. But the other things they found was exactly what I just told you. Political corruption was a factor, distrust in government, and distrust in each other. Those were the things that came out as the key factors leading to poor response to the pandemic. So, what do we do to restore that trust, right? Well, the first thing is, let's just be humble and say, often we so-called scientists get it very wrong, okay? And we have gotten it wrong, gotten wrong what's going on, and gotten wrong how to message what's going on throughout this pandemic. And I love this little cartoon of, this is, the recent CDC isolation quarantine guidelines. It was like a flow chart that went in multiple different vaccinated, unvaccinated, how long were you vaccinated, were you infected before, were you wearing a mask? I mean, it was just crazy, but to try to figure out, okay, do I isolate, do I quarantine or not, how long do I isolate, quarantine or not, do I need to take a test or not? We can do better. So it starts with a lot of humility that we who say, follow the science, we can do a lot better with our communication and doing the science, the type of science that's most meaningful to the people that we're talking to and most meaningful to them, balanced with what the political considerations are. But this is the role you all have, right? In this audience, all of those who are listening to me, these are things you can do to help bridge that divide and improve the trust that we have in science, right? So you can mitigate the spread of misinformation. Don't forward that message that says something bad will happen to you. We have like the internet chain letters now, right? Like remember, don't forward that email that says something ridiculous, right? And then provide better information. Teach individuals how to discern fact from fiction. Offer consistent and coherent messages in your own messaging and your own behavior, and think of every possible way we can build critical thinking and scientific processes into every level of education wherever we happen to do it. The heart of this, though, is your own actions and activities. So what is always been very clear, and I'm going to go back to vaccines because that was my main point, is that if your friends and family are vaccinated, you will be vaccinated. So as I say, it always starts with us, the individual you in this audience, to say, I have done the right thing, and then I will be a model of my friends and family. And that is usually the greatest predictor of whether or not you're vaccinated, if people in your circle are vaccinated. So that's where we can start, is doing the right thing ourselves, and then obviously sharing good information. There's lots of different ways to combat misinformation. You know, I get asked this all the time, how do you do it? What you don't do is you don't start with science, to be honest with you. Because remember, I just gave you that point, evolutionary theory versus intelligent design, right? People who don't believe the science have their own science, a different version of science, right? So for me, it always starts with empathy. What is your common connection to the person you're talking to? And then use that as a basis to talk about things that matter to you, family, friends, loved ones. How do you save their lives? And then use that as a way to then move the conversation forward. So I always start with empathy and trying to understand where the people's concerns are before just saying you're wrong. That's not going to get you anywhere, or just saying, you know, Dr. So-and-so said this is what you need to do, right? It's got to be an individual conversation, and when it becomes an individual conversation, you can then go from it's about controlling you to no, it's about controlling the virus, right? I got asked on CNN yesterday about removing masks. Actually, why am I wearing a mask when I'm far away from you, and I don't even need to when I'm far away from you, right? I'm over 6 feet away from you. And boosted, hello, and negative a couple of days ago. So I was asked about removing masks for kids in school, and I said, yeah, is it too soon? I said, no, it depends on what the local situation is, whether or not you want to remove the mask. And because my goal is not to put kids in masks or you know, control kids or adults. It's like, what do we need to do to keep them protected? And once they're protected, you're like, cool, no more masks, that's fine with me, no more social distancing. That's absolutely wonderful with me. We're social animals. We want to be with other people, right? So the only reason for those restrictions was because we wanted to control the virus and save lives, right? And then you drop them when you don't need them anymore. And so I'm absolutely fine with removing masks when we get cases down far enough in the community that it's not, you know, absenteeism down, the healthcare, we're not rationing healthcare, our healthcare workers are a little happier. Sure, who needs a mask anymore? Go about your life. It's a new normal. No intention to keep people wearing masks forever. And let me end with a good news story to this, right? So I just came back from 5 weeks in Saipan on a World Health Organization deployment because it's an island. Wait, do I tell you about Saipan? Island very, very far away. I want everybody to visit because it's an amazing place, a U.S. territory, 55,000 people, but multi-ethnic, multiracial, and they have Facebook, right? Now, unfortunately. Now, despite that, the governor and their secretary of health got together and said, you know what, we have a single hospital, and we don't get the opportunity to send somebody somewhere else if they're infected. There's ocean all around us, right? So we need to make things work in our own community for these individuals. And so they went out and said, okay, how do we work with our community to increase vaccination rates to protect our hospitals? And no vaccine mandate, right? The only vaccine mandates they had were the typical healthcare workers need to get vaccinated and the municipal employees needed to get vaccinated. No mask mandate. And still, they got, it's up there. They got to a 97% vaccination rate, right? By working with the community. And so this is possible, and this is, a Republican governor, U.S. territory. And so if they can do it, yes, I recognize it's 50,000 people. If they can do it, any one of us can do the same thing if we're willing to put in the time and effort to work with our community to say this is why this is important. As we get vaccination up, we can drop our mask, we can protect our kids, we can protect our healthcare system, get people back in for their surgeries that they've been waiting for the last 2 years, right? And we have the tool. We have a great tool available to us in our vaccine. I like this. This is the senior religious leader there, and I say, so if you take science, and in this case, if you add a little faith, you get to the final outcome. So we had a little heavenly intervention there to help them get to 97.5%. So I'm sending you off to go do the right thing, but I want to give you an example. This is Dr. Tenpenny of what you're going to confront when you go out there to do the right thing. This is an osteopathic clinician speaking at an Ohio hearing.
But I'm sure you've seen the pictures all over the internet of people who've had these shots and now they're magnetized. They can put a key on their forehead, it sticks. They can put spoons and forks all over them and they can stick. Because now we think that there's a metal piece to that. There's been people who've long suspected that there was some sort of an interface, yet to be defined, an interface between what's being injected in these shots and all of the 5G towers.
Okay, so there you go, 5G towers and magnetism. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. During the early part of the pandemic, you may have remembered the concept of it'll go away by magic. I don't really believe in pandemics going away about magic, but I do believe in the magic of people and the ability of people to change their society. So I'm going to leave you with 3 thoughts to address the key things that I thought were problematic and how to restore trust in science. One is become politically active. I want to see everybody on school boards. I want to see you on library boards. I want to see you in county commissioner meetings, right? Don't leave it up to other people. You need to make sure that you're engaged in your communities and politically engaged in the political process. The second thing is promote science literacy at every level, right? So yes, I spend a lot of time talking about it in middle schools and secondary schools and in colleges, but in every level, whenever you're educating, whenever you're talking to people, it's really important to promote science literacy. And the final thing is be a hope super spreader. So I know we spend a lot of time at the beginning of the pandemic talking about COVID super spreaders, but I want you to be hope super spreaders, because at least where the pandemic is concerned, we are in a very hopeful position right now. We have wonderful tools available to us to get into whatever this new normal phase looks like. So go out there armed with science and hope and change the world. All right, thank you everybody. I'll stop there.